Okay, hello again. All right, so this is going to be jam-packed because this is a very important parsha, number one. Um, and I'm coming at it from a few different angles to share with you. And also, if we have time at the end, I want to talk to you about a little bit about the two weeks that I'm going to be away and a little summary of what we're going to be missing. As I looked ahead, it's interesting timing because although every parsha has gems, the two that we will not be together for are a little bit uh, I don't want to say, like easier to miss. They're a little bit easier to miss um because of what they contain. But let's go ahead and start. We'll start as we always do with a summary of Parshat Yitro. Okay, so now we're in the book of Shemot, still in the book of Exodus, chapter 18, verse 1 through chapter 20, verse 23. And the name of the Parsha, Yitro, in English, you probably say Jethro. And it's found in Exodus 1. I'm going to call him Yitro but remember, a few weeks ago, we talked about how Yitro has, I think it's seven different names in the Torah, but this is the one by which he is most well known. He is the father-in-law of of Moses. Okay. And right now, Moshe is leading the people, and they have been through the splitting of the sea, what we call Kriyat Yamsuf. They have been through the war with Amalek, and Yitro he's back in Midian, and he hears of all these great miracles that God has performed for the people of Israel. And so he comes from Midian to the Israelite camp and he brings with him Tzipporah, who is Moshe's wife, and their two sons, Gershom and Eliezer. Okay. And as one of the first thing he notices is that that Moshe is spending an awful lot of time teaching Torah and giving instruction to his people when they have questions. And so he says to him in this parsha that you need to hire or you need to appoint other people, judges and so forth, to assist you in this task of governing and administering justice to the people because you're going to burn yourself out. Okay. That's the little summary of Yitro. We'll say a lot more about that. The children of Israel are now in this part of the parsha, they are now camped opposite Mount Sinai, where they are told that God has chosen them to be his kingdom of priests and holy nation. That's an important Mamlechet Kohanim v'Goy Kadosh. It's related to the concept of Or LaGoyim, and it is a special relationship, a special bond between this nation and and the God of Israel. And so the people respond and they proclaim everything that God has spoken we will do. Now, at this point in the story, it is the sixth day of the third month. The third month, remember, we talked about how in the Bible, all the months are counted from Nisan. Nisan, ER, Sivan. It is the month of Sivan, which on the English calendar happens usually around June time. It's 7 weeks after the Exodus, 7 weeks after the first Passover, that the entire nation is now assembled at the foot of Mount Sinai, getting ready for what we call Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah. God descends on the mountain. There's thunder, there's lightning, there's pillars of smoke, there's a blast of the shofar, and he summons God's son. So it's a big whole sound and light show thing going on. And he summons Moshe to ascend to the mountain. And then in the Parsha, we have the Ten Commandments, which we're going to be talking about a whole lot more. By the way, I might have mentioned this to you before. I don't know if I ever have, but that in a Christian Bible, the Ten Commandments are um, slightly different than in a Hebrew Bible. And I don't know how much I'm going to talk about that, but if you probably have both versions, you should look it up for yourself. Okay, let's talk about this character of Yitro because, as we always do, I want to focus on, to some extent, on the non-Jewish characters, and he's a big one. Okay, and so we have to go back to who was he before he was Moshe's father-in-law. So the Talmud tells us that Pharaoh Paro had three advisors. One was Bilam, which I think you know who I'm talking about. Is that what you
Mm.
call him? Somebody tell me what you
Balaam.
call him. Bilam. Okay. One was Eov, who is Job, and the third one was Yitro. And Paro is trying to decide what's the best method to exterminate the Israelites. This is going way back in the story, and he seeks the opinion of each of these three advisors. So Bilam, who is, by the way, a grandson of Lavan, was an evil man, just like his grandfather, and he relished the idea of eradicating the Israelites. And he was the one who advised Paro to kill all the male Israelites.
Mm.
Eov, who is Job, was actually, he opposed any plan to destroy the Israelites, but rather than display his true feelings, he didn't say anything. He might have known that his objections would be met with resistance. He might have rationalized that he could do more to help people of the slave nation at some later date if he just stays quiet. But as a result, he decides not to oppose or to accept Bilam's proposal. Instead, he remains silent. And that plays out later in his story. But Yitro is the one who vocally rejects Paro's idea of exterminating the Israelites, that he believed it was wrong that these people should be made to suffer for no crime other than being part of the Israelite nation. And because of his loud protests that angered Pharaoh, Yitro had to flee Egypt to save his own life. That's how he ends up in Midian. Okay. And the this piece of Talmud continues by telling us that each of the three advisors was either rewarded or punished according to what advice they gave. So Bilam, who was the one who encouraged the execution of thousands of innocent Israelites, he was killed by the very people that he tried to exterminate. Eov, who remained silent in the face of the oppression, he was afflicted himself with a life of pain and suffering. And Yitro, who fled because of his opposition to killing off the Israelites, sacrificing his position of leadership, a life of comfort, a life of wealth in Egypt, he eventually merited to become the father-in-law of Moses, and his descendants became prominent in the among the children of Israel. Okay, so that is an example of what we call, I've spoken to you about this before, Mida Keneged Mida, measure for measure, the idea that God rewards and punishes in accordance with the principle in English that we would say, like, the punishment fits the crime. Okay, so the that's a little bit of the background about Yitro. Now the Parsha begins with this emotional reunion between Moshe and Yitro. Remember that they knew each other back in Midian, and Moshe left in order to guide his people through this redemption process. But they are reunited. And the motivation behind this meeting seems to be the news of God's miracles in Egypt. And so um, Yitro, as I said, brings Moshe's wife and children, although they're not mentioned in the rest of the parsha other than in the introduction. The main focus then is on these two men, Moshe and his father-in-law. And now let's talk a little bit more about this meeting. What was Yitro's motivation for coming to the Israelite nation, and when did this meeting take place? And what's the nature of the advice that he gave Moshe? So, if you look at the very first opening verse, chapter 18, verse 1, and Yitro, the priest of Midian, the father-in-law of Moshe, heard all the wonderful things. Now, there's a big controversy in Jewish sources about whether Yitro came to visit Moshe before the giving of the Torah or after. And this question has puzzled all of the great commentators. And according to the Talmud, this issue of when he came is intermingled with which of God's miracles he had heard about that motivated him to come. So there's one opinion that says that he heard about the victory over Amalek, and that's when he came. And another opinion is that he heard the story of the giving of the Torah and he came after that. You understand the two opinions? These
Mhm.
two opinions, understanding them, it is reveals an issue in biblical exegesis and biblical explanation about this fundamental question. Is the Torah chronological? Is the Torah given to us chronologically? Do we look at it in a sequential framework chronologically, that every story exists one after the other, or that the Torah is not necessarily presented chronologically? In Hebrew, this concept is called Ein Mukdam U'Miyuchar B'Torah, which literally means there's no earlier and later in the Torah. So it's an age-old debate that has been discussed for centuries. But this issue with when did Yitro come is a really good example of it. Okay, because sometimes things are connected thematically and not necessarily chronologically, and that's why they're placed where they are in the Torah. So the idea that Yitro came before the giving of the Torah relies on the theory that the Torah is chronological. And it's written that he came beforehand. So because in the verses where he shows up are before the giving of the Torah. But there are those who feel like he came after the giving of the Torah. So then it is incumbent upon them to explain why is his visit then placed earlier in why is it rather than its correct chronological place. You understand what I'm saying? Like, why did the Torah say, oh, here comes Yitro, and then we have the giving of the Torah, as opposed to telling the story of the giving of the Torah, and and now along comes Yitro. Okay. So so one claim is that Yitro came to praise God for the victory over Amalek, which happened at the end of last week's Parsha. And that's the connection between these two things. The people were victorious over Amalek, and immediately after that, Yitro came to congratulate Moshe. There's another claim that his appearance is placed here because later on we don't want to disrupt the flow of the section that comes to talk about the giving of the Torah to mention, oh, by the way, and now Yitro showed up, so it's placed here. There's another approach that sometimes the Torah begins with a general overview of events before getting into the specifics. So um, the point is that all of these different approaches are trying to um, pin it a little bit on like where did it happen? Okay. Um, so there's another opinion that in reality he came both before and after Matan Torah, that Yitro came twice, but the Torah only records it once. Now, why would he have come twice? Which this is getting really deep. I hope you're following me, but it leads to a question that's brought up in the rabbinic commentary in the Midrash, whether or not Yitro converted to whatever this new Israelite faith. Did he just come to return Zipporah and Gershom and Eliezer, the two sons of Moshe and Zipporah, or did he come to participate in the revelation, to participate in the worship of God? So there's two opinions. One is that he came as a bystander, as a father-in-law, that he heard about this great physical miracle that his son-in-law experienced. He had no intention of converting to his son-in-law's religion, but he did want to praise the God of Moses and then give him advice. And then after he did that, he went home. But there's another view. There's a lot about Yitro that is that were left unclear about. But here's the other one, that he was awestruck by both the physically miraculous events that he heard about, the splitting of the sea, the war with Amalek, but he was even more struck by some kind of spiritual energy that was emanating from the Israelite camp that um, everybody in the world heard about. We talked about that when last week, I think I mentioned this to you, that when the sea split, all bodies of water all around the world split at the same moment. Okay. So even without social media, even without the internet, there's some kind of concept here that
Mm.
when the sound and light show was happening on Mount Sinai, that everybody in the world understood something dramatic was going on. And Yitro, who was a priest in Midian, our rabbis say that he had tried all the different kinds of avodah zarah, all the different kinds of idol worship, and he finally acknowledged that Hashem, that the God of Israel, is greater than all of the other gods, and that he was ready now to act on. He had done his research, and he was ready to act on this information. And according to this assumption, he came after the giving of the Torah and planned to stay and become part of the Jewish people. However, following his conversion, he went back to the land, to his land, to Midian, to spread the word, to promote God and this new religion. Now, did he convert or did he not convert? And what does conversion even mean in that time? So, by all opinions, Yitro, who had tried all kinds of idol worship, he came to recognize Hashem. He came to find Hashem. That's why he came back. So, minimally, he was at least what we would call today a Noahide, that he was observant of the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, the seven Noahide laws. But there are plenty of opinions that say that he was a full convert. Now, here's something fascinating that I actually just learned today from one of my teachers. When you spell Yitro's name in Hebrew, it's Yud Taf Resh Vav. Yud Taf Resh Vav. Now, the the most famous convert of all in the Torah is, of course, Ruth, who is Resh Vav Taf. Now, the letters are in a different order, but all of the letters that are in the name Ruth are also in the name Yitro. Okay. However, he was clearly, maybe this is my opinion, I'm not sure, but he was inferior to Ruth in that he accepted the Torah, but he didn't join the nation. Even though Moses begged him to stay, he left. Ruth, however, both accepted the Torah and accepted to join the Jewish people. Now, why is that relevant? Why am I mentioning this? I found two, I mean, I thought of, or Hashem sent me two reasons why this is important and it relates to the work that we're doing. Number one, a person cannot keep the Torah without a community. In the strictest sense, today, speaking today, no Orthodox rabbi would convert somebody who doesn't live in an Orthodox community. You can't be an you cannot observe Torah on a mountaintop by yourself. You just can't. It requires community. And so anybody who wants to join the Jewish people today has to live in and among a community of Jews, okay? But it also, I hope I'm not overstepping here, but this is what occurred to me, that it speaks to the issue of the messianic community that keeps Torah, but without being connected to Jewish teachers, Jewish community, and so forth. I think that Yitro, um, I would say, would be um, more like a messianic today as I understand it than as an Orthodox Jew, as a Torah observant Jew. Okay, I just want to end this Yitro piece with this idea that in Israel we have a minority religious community called the Druze, Druze, Druze. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, and they are we have very good terms with them. They have their community is mostly in northern Israel, and they have a very special relationship with Yitro. If you Google Yitro and the Druze, which sounds like Jews, but Druze, you'll find out that they regard him as kind of the way we think of Moses or something like that. Now, so Yitro is buried in Israel in the north. And I don't know if any of you have ever done this, but my husband and I went to visit maybe when I was already doing this kind of work, reaching out to the nations, but not in the last 5 years or so. So I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years ago. We were up north, and I said I want to go visit the gravesite of of Yitro. And it's in a Druze village. It's not hard to get to, but the funny thing is that um, they require modest dress in order to visit the grave, which is not unusual in Israel. In a, like if you would go to the Kotel, to the Western Wall, or to a synagogue, you would expect, to cover up a little bit. Usually, the cover up situation is required of women. What's funny, I think we were there in the summer, and my husband was wearing a short sleeve shirt, and they wouldn't let him in because his arms were bare. And they had this rack of thrift store shirts, and they made him put on a long sleeve shirt before I mean, I was dressed the way I dressed, so I was covered, but they made him put on a long sleeve shirt before he can go in. I thought that was a very funny experience. Anyway, I'll tell you personally that while I was there, I'm not used to praying at the grave of non-Jews, but one of the things I said, or one of the things I spoke, I'm not really sure who I was talking to, but I said, I'm here at this grave of this person who is revered in the Druze community, and he represents something about the relationship between Jews and the nations, and that that I wanted to connect to that. I'm only thinking about this now, about what like I was asking Hashem to help me in this work, and I did it at the grave of Yitro, which, by the way, if any of you next time you're in Israel, I really recommend that you go. It's very beautiful, and very well kept. Okay, that's a little bit about Yitro. Now, I want to shift gears and talk about chapter 19, verse 15, because just before the giving of the Torah, there's a verse that jumps out at at me as a woman, and probably would to you as women. This is the verse, chapter 19, verse 15. He, meaning Moshe, said to the people, "Be ready for 3 days. Do not go near a woman." Okay, so he's saying, we're going to get the Torah in 3 days. You have to prepare yourself spiritually. Stay away from women. So first of all, he's obviously addressing himself to the men, because he doesn't. It's not a problem for women to be around other women. So this verse used to trouble me very much, because it seemed to imply that if a man was intimate, yeah, by the way, this means sexually, stay away, don't go near a woman sexually. That if a man was intimate with a woman within 3 days of the revelation, he would be spiritually unfit to receive the Ten Commandments, like she's the corrupting influence. That's the way I used to read it. Okay, keep yourself pure, stay away from women. But I did some additional research, and now I understand it a different way. Without delving completely, totally deeply into this very deep concept. In the Torah world, there are certain things that render a person, the Hebrew word is tameh, which is generally translated as unclean, but it doesn't actually mean unclean in the sense of dirty. It means ritually unfit or ritually impure. And one of the things that renders a person ritually unfit or ritually impure is contact with a dead body. And it's a very deep idea, and I'm just glossing over it. But the idea of this verse is that if a man were to be intimate with a woman within that 3 day window before the giving of the Torah, his semen in her would render her tameh, and then she would be unable to participate in the revelation. So it seems that Moshe is warning the men not to mess up the chance that women have to be in the presence of God, which I really like that interpretation a whole lot better. Now, Rashi, who's the our great biblical commentator, says that well, he basically says what I just said. If the couple has intercourse 3 days before, she can still immerse in a mikveh and be spiritually prepared to receive the Torah. But if they were intimate within that period of time, she would be not accessible, not ritually, um, not ritually fit to receive the Torah. You get the idea. Okay. There's another verse um, that also has a reference to women, but you wouldn't see it like you wouldn't see it just plainly the way the other verse did. I'm in chapter 19, verse 3. Moshe ascended to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, So shall you say to the house of Jacob, and tell the sons of Israel. Okay, now according to Rashi, the house of Israel, which in Hebrew is Beit Yaakov, which is, by the way, the name of a network of Torah schools for girls, refers to the women. And the verb, so in English, you can see that it says, you shall say and you shall tell. I don't know what your translation is, but there are two separate Hebrew verbs for this idea of communicating. One, you shall say, is tomar, which meaning to say. It's an instruction to Moshe to speak to them using more softer, more gentle language. And the sons of Israel in Hebrew is Bnei Yisrael. That refers to the men. To the men, Moshe's told he needs to spell out the details of the mitzvot and the punishments for not obeying God. So there's an underlying idea here that, God created us, so he knows our natures and he knows how things differ. And so he's saying that men are more motivated, generally speaking, more motivated by fear, and women are more motivated by love. So he's saying to Moshe, basically, speak to the women in a softer way to bring them close, but to the men, you have to be a little harsher and scare them, scare them a little bit. Now, look at the verse. The Lord called to him from the mountains, saying, So shall you say to the house of Yaakov, the women, and tell the sons of Israel, the men. So that appears to be saying, speak to the women first. Tell the women first. And there's a few reasons suggested for this, but the one that I like the most is that in the Garden of Eden, God told Adam not to eat from the tree of knowledge. How did Chava get that instruction? Not directly from Hashem, but when sharing God's message to Chava, to Eve, Adam told her not to eat and also not to touch the tree. And that's not what God said. Okay. So if you go all the way back to Bereshit, chapter 2, verse 17, this is what God said to Adam. He said, But of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you shall not eat of it, for on the day that you eat thereof, you shall surely die. Nothing there about touching. Got it? Okay. What did Chava, Eve, when she was talking to the snake, how did she explain her understanding of what was prohibited? She said to the snake, But of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, meaning the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, God said, You shall not eat of it, and you shall not touch it, lest you die. That's in Bereshit chapter 3, verse 3. Did God say that? No, he did not. Okay. So as a result of this miscommunication or Adam's um, poor translation or poor transmission of what God actually said, as a result of God not saying it to Chava at the same time saying it to Adam, that made an opening for the snake. Because what happened was the snake pushed her against the tree. And he was able to convince her that just like nothing happened when you touched it, because that of course was not forbidden. So nothing's going to happen if you eat from it, which of course was forbidden. But you see how he used this mistaken transmission. Um, so where did this added idea come from? It's unclear. Did Adam, when he related Hashem's words, miscommunicate? Maybe he was thinking, I'm going to tell her it's a good idea not to touch it because then she for sure won't come to eat from it. Um, but or did she add it when she spoke to the snake? It's a little unclear. But the point is that because she was not commanded directly from God, she did not hear the commandment directly from God. A terrible sin happened, and that sin has echoes until today. And to avoid that, at the giving of the Torah, God spoke to the women first. I love that explanation. I hope it resonates for you. Um, okay. And I feel like I'm covering like a lot of ground really fast. I hope that you're Natalie's with me. Okay. Um, all right. So I'm just trying to make this window a little bit bigger so I can. All right. I want to talk about the structure of the Ten Commandments. Okay. And there's a generally understood idea that the Ten Commandments, you know that they came down on two luchot, on two tablets, and that there was 1 through 5 on one and 6 through 10 on the other. So we're going to go through this in the Jewish counting, obviously, of this. And I want to explain that the first five are all, we would say in English, like for the honor of God. They are the mitzvot bein adam lamakom, between a person and the creator. Okay. So the first one, just in short, because some of them are a few verses long, the first of the commandments is to believe in God. The second is to not believe in anything but God. This is where Jews and Christians have some different understandings. The third is not to use the divine name in any inappropriate manner. The fourth is to keep Shabbat, and the fifth is respect for parents. Now, why is the commandment to honor parents located on the section that deals with the relationship between a person and God? That is a question that often comes up because the other side, the 6 through 10, what we call bein adam lechavero, the relationship between a person and their friend, literally friend, but another person between people, sounds like respecting your parents should be between you and other people, right? Your parents are people. Okay, so one answer is that um, God is saying, just as I commanded you to honor me, I'm also commanding you to honor my partners in creation. So there's a Jewish idea that there are three partners in the creation of every human being. There's God and the mother and the father. Okay. So there's also an idea that respect, excuse me, respect for parents is also a commandment that naturally leads us to respect God. If respect for parents is based on this enormous, unrepayable debt that we owe our parents for our very existence, for all of their worry, for all of their care, then how much more so do we owe honor and respect to God for all that? So the commandment to revere one's parents, to honor one's parents, sits well in this regard in the first section because it is an echo, I would say, of the relationship between people and God. Can you see the connection? Okay. Now let's look at the other side, number 6 through 10. For the things that we are commanded to do for the honor of other people, bein adam lechavero, not to murder, not to commit adultery, not to steal, um, not to speak false testimony in court, and not to covet the property or the spouse of another person. Now, here's something interesting that I learned in doing this research is that on each side we have ideas, words, and action. I'm going to show you what I mean. The first of the Ten Commandments, belief in God, that's an idea. The second, the exclusion of belief in and service to other gods, that's an idea. Not to use the divine name in an improper manner, that those are words. That's an action you take, something you do with your words. Keeping Shabbat, that's an action. Respect for your parents, that's an action. So both ideas, words, and action, we see that in 1 through 5. In 6 through 10, we also see that. Where do we see that? Not to murder, that's an action. Not to commit adultery, that's an action. Not to steal, that's an action. But where are the words? Not to deliver false testimony in court. And the idea, something that only happens in your head, to covet the property or the spouse of another person. That's the idea piece of it. So I thought that was a really nice parallel. Let's go a little bit deeper, if you're with me. And the first, the this is, by the way, in Shemot, in the book of Exodus, chapter 20. The first two of the Ten Commandments are spoken in the first person. I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but in Shemot, in the book of Exodus, chapter 20, verse 2, it says, I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. And um, and then in verses 3 through 6, which is the second, you shall not have gods of others in my presence. You shall not make for yourself a graven image or any likeness which is in the heavens above and which is on the earth below, or which is the water beneath the earth, which is you shall neither prostrate yourself before them. This is just a longer way of saying don't worship anything but me. Prostrate yourself before them, for I, the Lord your God, am a zealous God who visits the iniquity of the fathers on the sons upon the third and fourth generation of those who hate me. And I perform loving kindness to thousands of generations to those who love me and to those who keep my commandments. You hear all the first person, I, me, my, mine, right? Okay. Now the rest of them are in third person. So the very next verse, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord, third person, will not hold blameless anyone who takes his, third person, name in vain. For the next one, for in 6 days the Lord, third person, made the heaven and the earth, the sea, and all that's in them, and he, third person, rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and sanctified it. Okay, I think I made my point. The first two commandments appear as if God himself is talking, and they're written in the first person. And um, I show favor to those who love me. I took you out of Egypt, but then everything goes into third person. Didn't God give us all the commandments? Aren't they all godly commandments? What is this dramatic shift within the Ten Commandments? So the helps us begin to understand this issue when it explains that God himself, however you understand this, spoke the first two commandments, and Moses was responsible for transmitting the others. Why was it divided that way? Because, according to this opinion, the people were so awestruck and frightened by the thunder, the lightning, the loud shofar, the smoking mountain, and that they couldn't handle it. It was too spiritually intense for them. And so they said, "You, Moses, we want to obey, but we can't handle this. So please don't let God talk to us directly anymore, and you tell us the rest. And we'll do it, but we need like to we need to dial down the intensity of this a little bit. Okay, and that is in fact what happened, and that is the explanation for why the first two are first person and the last eight are third person. Okay. And if you look in chapter 20, verses 15 through 18, you'll see that this is a conversation between the people and Moshe. And it says, the last verse, the people remained at a distance while Moshe approached the thick cloud. So only Moshe had um, the spiritual strength, I guess, to deal with God directly. As a matter of fact, we have a tradition that Moshe is the only human being who ever spoke to God panim al panim, face to face, that nobody else could handle that level. Even prophets, um, who may hear voices or they may see visions, they may have a direct experience of God, but it's not an experience of it's not an experience of God the way Moses did directly. So Moses became the vehicle, Moses became the vessel for the transmission of the rest of the Torah because it was too much for the rest of the people. One of the things that I find really interesting about this is that there is a tradition that Moshe is related, just as he was the first redeemer, that the soul of Moshe, I don't exactly know how this plays out, but the soul of Moshe plays a part in the final redemption. Whether the soul of Moshe himself comes back in Mashiach ben David, I'm not exactly sure how that works, but there's a connection between the first Redeemer and the final Redeemer, and even more between, I think I told you this idea, but I'll repeat it again here, this idea that there is more Torah to be revealed, to be taught than we have access to right now. And that is called Torah Mashiach, the Torah of Mashiach. And so at some point in the future, things that don't make sense now, things that don't add up now, things that seem to have pieces missing, or things that we didn't even know, we didn't even notice were not the whole story, we'll get the whole story. And that comes through Mashiach. And so Moshe, just as he did at the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, so he will again be somehow connected to the idea of bringing the Torah of Mashiach down into the world. Isn't that fascinating? I find that fascinating. Okay, that is a little bit about Parshat Yitro. Some of it was very deep. I hope you learned some stuff. I want to finish by talking about the summary of the next 2 weeks of Parshiot that we are not going to be able to go into in depth together. Um, so this week is Parshat Yitro. Next week is Parshat Mishpatim, which is in the book of Exodus still. This is all still the book of Exodus, chapter 21, verse 1 through chapter 24, verse 18. If you notice a pattern, you'll see that every parsha is around 3 chapters, pakoto yoter, more or less. Okay. The name of the parsha, Mishpatim, literally means ordinances. It's one of the kinds of laws. So there's different kinds of laws, and Mishpatim are one of the sets of laws. So now it's after the revelation at Sinai, and now God is giving a series of laws for the people of Israel to follow, which include laws related to the indentured servant, the penalties for murder, for kidnapping, very much on our minds these days, assault, theft, civil laws that pertain to damages, what is called, we call in English torts, the granting of loans, the rules governing the conduct of justice by courts of law. Also included are the laws warning against mistreatment of foreigners, the observance of the festivals, the agricultural gifts that are meant to be brought to the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. Now, remember, at this stage, the Holy Temple doesn't exist yet, but there is a precursor to the Holy Temple that we call the Mishkan, the tabernacle. And but God has to tell them everything, even the things that aren't immediately relevant. Okay. The prohibition against cooking meat with milk, the mitzvah of prayer. All together in this parsha of Mishpatim, there are 53 laws, 53 of the 613 packed into this one parsha. It's a very heavy law-related parsha. Of those 53, 23 are what we call positive, which like thou shalt, the things you're supposed to do, the commandments you're supposed to do, and 30 of them are negative, thou shalt nots. Okay. Now, God again promises to bring the people of Israel to the Holy Land, and he warns them again against assimilating or assuming the pagan ways of the people who live in the land right now. And there's a very famous line in this parsha where the people proclaim, you might have heard this in Hebrew, I'm not sure, Naseh v'nishma, which means literally we will do and we will hear all that God commands us, meaning they commit to following God's laws before they even know all of the details. And also in this parsha, Moshe goes up to Mount Sinai for 40 days to get like all the details and to receive the entirety of the Torah from God. And he leaves his brother Aaron and Hur. I don't know what you call him. This is the son of Miriam, so the nephew of Moses and Aaron. They're kind of in charge down below while Moses is up on the mountain communing with God for 40 days. Okay. That is Mishpatim. And um, and then in 2 weeks, is the parsha called Truma. This is in the book of Shimon, the book of Exodus, chapter 25, verse 1 to 27, verse 19. Truma means offering, and you'll find it in chapter 25, verse 2. Today, that word is used in modern Hebrew to refer to the requirement to separate a portion of produce that's grown in the land before we can eat it. Um, it's a it's complicated, and most when you buy produce in the land of Israel, this procedure has already been done if you buy it from a reliable store. Interestingly enough, on the road outside of Efrat, like if I was to go from Efrat to Ramat Beit Shemesh, there's often people with roadside stands, and they are often Arabs, and their produce was seemingly, it's a little confusing what the status of that produce is, because it was on the one hand seemingly grown on the land of Israel, like in an Arab village or something, but whether it has the holiness of the produce of the land of Israel is something that's it's a matter of, it's not so clear. It's um so it's also true that you may be familiar with the concept of a Shemitah year, that every 7 years, Jewish farmers, this is a Torah commandment, that every 7 years, Jewish farmers are supposed to basically take the year off, let their fields lie fallow, and focus themselves on studying Torah for that year and not planting anything. So then what do the people eat if there's no planting? So in modern day Israel, I don't know how this was in biblical times, but in modern day Israel, there's a couple of options. One is that Israel imports produce during a Shemitah year from other countries. And when you are in a grocery store in Israel during a Shemitah year, if you want to buy, let's say you want to buy a bag of apples, you would look at the sign above the apples and it would tell you what's the source of the apples. Okay. So whether they were imported, whether so there's a whole thing about Arab produce. So some people, I don't know what's going to be in the next Shemitah year. I don't know where we're going to be in our relationship with our neighbors, what the Jews refer to as our cousins. I don't know, but there are people who will only eat Arab produce during a Shemitah year because there's no question about the status of that produce. And then there's also, without getting into a lot of details, there's this halachic um, sort of workaround that a farmer can sell his field. Um, he sells his field and then he can plant. And some people, it's so complicated, and I'm not like a big halakhic expert on this, but some people during a Shemitah year will eat that kind of produce as well. So everybody makes their own decisions and calculations. But anyway, I went way off the topic of truma. So let's just finish up by talking about what happens in this parsha. So now it's time to build the Mishkan, to build the sanctuary, to build the tabernacle. The people of Israel are now called upon to contribute 13 different kinds of materials. Now remember, when they left Egypt, they left with great wealth. If you remember, they went to their Egyptian neighbors and they said, "Ooh, can I borrow that? Can I borrow that?" And then when the army of when Pharaoh's army was drowned in the sea, all of the chariots that were encrusted with jewels washed up on the shore. And so, if you're wondering how do a nomadic people in the desert have these materials, that's how they have them. Okay. So, what were the 13 materials? Gold, silver, copper. Those are the metals. Wool, red, purple, and blue. Flax, goat hair, animal skins, wood, olive oil, spices, and gems. Okay, out of which God says to Moses that they shall make for me a sanctuary and I shall dwell amidst them. Okay, this is the beginning of the the construction of the Mishkan. I don't know if I told you this story that many years ago, my husband and I went to we lived in Baltimore, which for those of you that are not from America, it's fairly close to Washington, D.C. But north of there, there's a big Amish community. And we heard that this Amish community built a replica, is somewhere in Pennsylvania, built a replica of the biblical tabernacle, the biblical Mishkan. And so we wanted to go see it. So there's like this little show. Did I tell you this story? I'm not sure if I told you the story. So we go and we're trying to compare what we're seeing to like what we know from like what the Torah says about what it was supposed to look like. And it's a little cheesy. There's like a little Aaron that comes out on, he's like this animated, not animated, like a robot sort of thing comes out on a track and he lights the menorah. It's actually really very cute. But like um up until the end, we're saying to each other, wow, this like seems pretty consistent with, like pretty kosher, whatever. It's consistent with the way that we understand the building of the tabernacle. And then at the end of the automated show, this woman comes out and then she starts talking about Christian things. And so that was a little disappointing to us, but we probably were like the only Jews who ever went to see this thing. So anyway, okay. So Moses is up on the top of Mount Sinai and God is giving him detailed instructions on how to construct this sanctuary, this dwelling place, so that not only is it a fit place for God to um, dwell in, but also so that it can be easily taken apart and put back together. Because remember, they're still going all over the place. They're going from location to location. So it has to be easy to dismantle, transport, and reassemble as they are journeying through the desert. Okay. Um, and so we learn some of the details of what the sanctuary is supposed to look like. There's an inner chamber, and there's these artistically woven curtains that is the ark that's going to contain the what we call the luchot. I don't the tablets. I'm not sure what you call them. Can somebody unmute yourself? Tell me, what do you call like what what he was carrying that the Ten Commandments were written on? What do you call them? Anybody?
Tablets?
Tablets?
Yeah.
Okay. All right,
Yeah.
the tablets. So we call them the luchot, but the tablets that the Ten Commandments were engraved on. There's actually later on in the story, we find that the first set of tablets were destroyed. You already know that. Sneak
Mhm.
does not, but that there's a tradition that the second set of tablets still exist in the world somewhere. They're hidden away along with the jar of manna, the jar of mun that we spoke about last week. And someday, God willing, we will all get to actually see it with our own eyes. But anyway, so there's an ark that has the tablets of the engraved with the Ten Commandments. There's the Kruvim, the two angels, the winged angels that are hammered out of pure gold. And then there's the seven branched menorah. Remember, that's different than the nine branched, we call it menorah, but really it's a Hanukkah. The special table, the shulchan, the special bread. So God is explaining to him all of these architectural details of what it's supposed to look like, and that the three walls are fitted together with a certain number of boards, each of which has gold. It's very this. I think my husband refers to this as the Home Depot chapter. There's like a lot of specifics about how many sockets and um, how many boards and all that stuff, and then there's three layers of coverings on the roof and so on and so forth. And then surrounding the sanctuary and the altar in front of it is also an enclosure that has 60 wooden poles with silver hooks, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so that's what we're missing, guys. That's what I am not. The Home Depot chapters is what I'm not going to be with you for because I will be, God willing, in what I hope will be sunny Florida with my family. Um, Okay, so that's like just a little sneak preview of what's coming. And at the beginning of March, we will get back together. Okay, so that's what I prepared. And now I see we have I did that. Well, I talked really fast, but um, we have 4 minutes left. Is there anybody in this time that, by the way, thank you guys so much for coming to join. I really appreciate the chance to see all of you, and especially those of you that keep your cameras on um, when you can. It's just really nice for me to see you. And I want to ask you, does anybody want to ask anything or say something before we finish up for this week? Natalie.
Yes,
Yes.
again. I have a question because when I was reading it today, and Yitro is written, he is the father-in-law of Moses. He is the father-in-law of Moses. It's said 7 times in the first chapter. Do you know why?
I believe, okay, this is my theory. I don't
Hmm.
know. I can look a little bit more deeply, but the first thing that comes to mind is remember we talked about the three advisors
Hmm.
and how they were either punished or rewarded. So I think that by connecting Yitro to Moshe, that's a tremendous honor,
Elevation,
right?
elevation.
I think it's an honor because he's the one who said, no, we shouldn't kill these innocent slaves. That's not the right thing to do. So I think by connecting his name to Moshe, it's just a reminder of how elevated he is in the eyes of God, even though he was an idol worshiper. At least until the giving of the Torah. He was not just an he was like the biggest, like, I'm going to try every kind of idol worship that there is out there to try to find out what's true. And that was his MO in the world. And even still, he merited to be the father-in-law of Moshe. But
It's interesting.
I will, that's my off the cuff answer. But I'll look and see if I can find anything else on that. Anybody else before we go? Yes, Helen.
Is it true that Zipporah left Moses? I was really shocked to read that. She went back to Jethro's.
No, I am not.
No,
So this is what you might be. Well, I'd like to see where you said you read it. I'd like to see what you read, but here's the way I understand
okay.
it. Okay, so when Moses is originally going to Egypt after the burning bush, that whole story, he has
Yes,
Sipporah and the two children with him.
yes.
Aaron, his brother, says to him, "What are you doing? We are slaves. You cannot bring your wife and children into this environment. Send them back." So he sends them back. They come
Oh, I
back. They come back with Yitro at the beginning of this parsha. It even says it. I don't know if it
mhm,
says it by name, but it's clear that it's referring to, maybe it says, "I brought your wife and your children with you." I don't remember exactly what it says.
mhm.
She comes back. Now, later on, after the giving of the Torah, remember we talked about the 3 days that men and women were supposed to separate from each other in
Yeah.
order that they're not tummy,
Mm.
that they're not ritually impure to receive the Torah. So after the giving of the Torah, basically everybody else is like allowed to be together again, except Moses, because he's on such he's such a BFF with God that he has to be prepared at all times to for God to speak to him, which means he cannot enter the state of ritual impurity, which means he cannot be intimate with his wife anymore. And so, although the way that I understand it, they still like shared the same tent, they did not share the same bed, however you understand that. And so that's the way that I understand the story. And that's actually much later on. We're going to read about that Miriam and Aaron, the brother and
Mhm.
sister of Moshe,
Yeah,
are not so happy about this, and they
yeah.
call him. There's a whole story that goes with that. Some of you, Vicky, you're shaking your head. I think you already know it. That's we're gonna look at that when we get to that week's parsha. But she never leaves him,
Hmm.
like separates, like divorces him. That's the
Thank
chronology we
you.
understand it. Sure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Before we finish, anybody else, anything you want to ask or say before we
I
go?
don't know if you feel comfortable sharing online, but I wanted to just see how you guys were feeling with everything going on in Israel.
Are you asking me or are you asking everybody else?
You.
How I feel.
You're,
Um,
I don't almost don't even listen to the news. I'm like, I gotta ask Rivka, my friend.
okay, I think there's something really, I've never experienced
Yeah.
what what I'm experiencing. I think most people would say that. There's incredible optimism that something has shifted. At the same time, there's incredible fear about the state of our hostages, worry
Hmm.
about the what's coming. And both things, it's like a very heightened sense of anxiety and sadness and worry at the exact same time that there's a heightened sense of, oh, finally, people are talking about something other than same old, and maybe
Yeah.
now something's going to change. And so I'm going to tell you quite honestly. So I'm going, my husband and I are leaving on Thursday to go and visit my family in America. And I have this debate with myself about how much really I could use a break. It's been 494 days of this really intense,
Mhm.
emotionally intense time. And Natalie
Yeah.
lives here in Israel. She can tell you the same is true. We all feel it. And is it like the right thing to do? I'm just going to go to America. I'm just going to disengage just for 10 days, like I'm just going to just I don't know, like go sit by the pool and read novels and um, you know, play around with my family and not think about the intensity of what's going on here. And because I could really use that break. But is that like, am I being like a bad Jew if I do that? Like, I'm just going to disconnect myself from what is arguably one of the most important moments in history because we are, like, everybody feels it, something's coming, something big is coming. And um, that's my own inner struggle. But anyway, that's basically, I would say if I had to encapsulate, I would say those are the two feelings. Some people are more on
Yeah.
one, some people are more on the other. It's really hard to hold both of them at the same time. Um, and God bless all of you because I appreciate whether in the group or privately when you talk to me and you send me stuff and you ask me about what's like really going on. It means a lot to me that you're connected, just as it has for all the time that we've been together. Whenever there's something intense going on. In 1997, my husband and I were going to come to Israel with a group. It was a group from Baltimore. There was supposed to be an Orthodox rabbi, a conservative rabbi, and a Reform rabbi. We're each going to bring people in their communities to Israel. And so my husband was the Orthodox rabbi, and we were at this like orientation session. And the guy the Israeli who was putting this trip together, he says to us, this is going to be a very interesting time to be in Israel. And then he said, what am I talking about? It's always an interesting time to be in Israel. There's always something going on in Israel um, because it's a very intense country. And that intensity has been ramped up by a factor of like 10 million, I don't know, in the last bit. Okay, thank you for asking. All right. All right, so I bless you all with an excellent, excellent 2 weeks. May we come home to, we say in Israel, Besorot Tovot, only good news. And I'm always available to you on WhatsApp unless I'm in transit, literally. So take care. I'll miss you, and I'll see
Thank
you
you
in a
so
couple of weeks.
much.
God
Thank you.
bless.
Thank you. That's
Thank you.
amazing.
Have a safe and good trip.
Amen. Thank you very
Yes,
much.
thank you so much.